All right. I guess it's time. Let's begin. So first, thanks for joining. I know it's right before lunch, but it's nice to be back in Grand Rapids for GrrCON. So first up, a little bit about me. Right now, I'm a lead security engineer at Target. I work on the intel and detection team. So one of our big responsibilities is we track threat actors and try to build detection around those threat actors. Before that, I was on the incident response team in a couple roles, and I had incident response and web app pen testing experience in the area at a community college and a healthcare system that you probably can guess. But yeah, it's really nice to be back in Michigan to talk about phishing and building detection. So, like I said, we're going to be talking about phishing. So we're going to be talking about the pages, analysis, how you can build detection, and how we can automate this. Phishing, as you all know, is still a really big issue. Attacks big and small often stem from an email nexus. So we're going to be looking at that. While malware is really fun, this talk is mostly focused on credential phishing, which, right, still important, but maybe not quite as flashy. But hopefully we can find some stuff to make it a little bit more flashy. And again, right, the whole point of this is to try to make it easier for analysis, speed up your time that you have someone actually looking at the phishing page. And hopefully we can also create some detection. We have some ways that we can hopefully do that automatically. So first up, right, we're just going to talk about the actual analysis of the page. There's a few things that I like to look for when I'm looking at a phishing page. First up, right, you kind of get just like a gut feeling of the page, right? Like you've seen enough phishing pages, you know kind of what to look for, what you're expecting to see. But on the inside of the page, I really like to look at forms and inputs. So the form will tell you where the data goes, and input tags will tell you what that data is that they're sending. It's not super common, but I also like to look for external domains. These can provide, right, just additional insight into like infrastructure used or kind of anything around there. Like I said, right, like phishing is a big issue. So it's something we want to track. But due to the amount of phishing, this can create a bit of a problem. However, if anyone saw my talk last year, I showed some of the analysis benefits you can get from looking at phishing pages. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that, but more around how your analysts can use it and how you can build detection for it. And again, right, the problem with doing all of this stuff manually is, right, like it's a manual process, it's slow, and depending on the amount of phishing reports you get, this can be a huge time sink. So you could have your folks, like maybe this is not your full-time job, maybe this is just something you can just dedicate like 20% of your day to. So like this stuff can build up pretty quick. Additionally, the pages, they like could just go down, right? So while you're looking at it, you go to look at it the next day, the page is down, and now you don't know what was on the site. So my solution to this whole thing is, right, like let's try to automate it. So my process was, let's grab the page and look at the form data, because that's where, at least to me, that's where the meat and potatoes of a phishing page is. So we're going to look at this data, we're going to grab the page, find the form, and see what's being sent. At least for my thought process, I was like, well, let's take a look at it in Python. That's the language I'm most familiar with. And there's a few things we're going to want to consider. Right. So first off, we're going to need to be doing HTTP requests. I'm most familiar with using the request library. However, there's some issues with that. The first being that it makes following redirects kind of a pain. It won't render the JavaScript. And we're also parsing the page, so we're going to want to look at Beautiful Soup, for example. This will let you take apart the HTML and really dig into how the structure of the page is laid out. And like I said, requests isn't going to actually work for us in this case. And so I was looking at Selenium. That's a headless browser that you can interact with in Python or Java if you wanted. But it has a lot of benefits over using requests in this way. So it'll follow redirects, and you can grab screenshots. The screenshots make it really useful for when you want your analysts to look at the page and be able to rely on their gut instinct. And we kind of had this last year. I mentioned, right? You can't wget a PHP file and expect to get the actual PHP source code because it'll be rendered on the client side. It'll be rendered on the server side, and you only get the HTML output. That's true for Selenium as well. So you can't just start making these requests to try to get the real beefy content to the page. But we can get the HTML that the browser sees and that the user sees, which is useful for this. So next up, we're going to want to start creating detection around this. If you're doing this manually, as I was, this is going to most likely be either snort or suricata signatures. And you're going to want to look at the post body. This is where your real benefits are going to come from. I went with suricata for a couple of reasons, right? The syntax between suricata and snort are very similar, and that allows for kind of more cross-platform between the rules. And suricata or snort is supported on a lot of different products, which is nice. And it also lets us get a little deeper than some other detection types might. So we can get a little bit more into the post body to actually dig into what is going on in the packet. And then this just kind of shows what we're going to be looking at. These highlighted bits are from a real phishing page, and these were just sample card numbers and passwords, and then just kind of the information we would want to potentially alert on. And again, right, there's some issues if you're trying to do this all manually. First off, suricata and snort both have signature IDs that if you put in either too large of a number or the number is reused, the rules won't load properly. So this is a good way to kind of automate that process. We'll go through the pages and we'll make sure every rule has a unique signature ID. Another downside to all the manual stuff that hopefully we can try to resolve is you're not having to capture a PCAP for each page and then dig into the post body or open up the network tab in Chrome or whatever and try to actually view the post body of this. If we can automate it, that's going to be a win for creating detection. And then I wanted to quickly just jump into rule syntax real quick. So a suricata rule is kind of broken up into three main parts. There's the action that happens. So in this case, that's an alert. It could also be drop is also pretty common. And then we have the headers that show the protocol that we're looking at, the IP variables or subnets that we're going to and from, along with the ports that we're going to and from. And then you get into the options. This is basically just like the rule logic. It'll have a message that appears in the alert feed, as well as the signature ID that we already talked about. And then we get into the actual logic of the rule. So this is just a simple one. We're looking at post data for a method, and then the actual post data just includes password equals. So again, right, we're going to want to automate this. This is just a way that we can get into creating rules faster. So we're going to read the HTTP body, dig into the HTML, find form data, find input data, and make sure that we are finding the right fields to create the rules from. So the tool that I was working on, I name everything after animals. So last year we were talking about orca. This year we're talking about muskrat. So it will go through, grab the form data, grab input data, and fill those into the rule syntax using just like a template to create these rules. There are a few types that we try to ignore, and we can get into that towards the top, we ignore buttons, checkboxes, and no script tags. All of these things can sometimes appear in either forms or inputs that I've seen, and they kind of just, they're not always sent. So sometimes they'll be toggled on when they shouldn't be. And it was just causing false positives. And worse, in some cases, it was causing false negatives. So we just ignore some of this stuff at risk of creating more alerts than we should. From what I've seen so far, that doesn't happen too often. So yeah, we kind of just, I can just kind of go through this a little bit. The Python code here, this is the portion that's actually generating the rule. So at this point in the code, we've already extracted out the HTTP, the HTML from Beautiful Soup. We're looking at, and then we start going through looking for form data and looking for the inputs from there. We save out any actions, that the action field in the form data, that's where the content is going to, right? So that'll be like post to log.php. We can toggle this field on and off in Muskrat just to help narrow in on the traffic we're looking at. And then it just kind of, it just goes through, adds it to a rule, and it just prints it. So, right, there are some issues that can kind of come up with automatic detection. And I kind of already started to touch on one. And it's the false positive, false negative, true negative ratio, right? Like if you're too focused in on one particular page, you might get to a scenario where you're only matching that one page, even though the same fish kit might be deployed on another site. You should be able to match on that content as well. So if the rule is too narrow, you won't get those hits. So this is just a way that we can, right, just something we have to keep in mind when it comes to these automatic rules. So we have to look at ways that we can make this stuff either a little broader, but not without falling into the pitfall of hitting benign traffic. And again, I kind of mentioned it. Last year I did a talk on fish kits. These are the like HTTP source code for the page. And one of the things that I noticed last year was that a lot of these pages, they'll be essentially redeployed over and over with a different directory structure, which will make it so that the action field, so the actual URI that the data gets posted to, changes, which isn't something that we really want in this case, because the content of the page is the same, but the name of the the folder structure has changed. So the rules won't fire when they should. So it's just something we have to kind of pay attention to or be aware of. And one of the things that, similarly, that we noticed that's not often changed is the actual file name of where stuff gets posted to does not often change. So if the directory structure changes, but the log.php stays the same each time, there might be something that we can do there as well. So that's something I'm working on now. I'm trying to just like strip out the directory structure from the rule logic. So right, like at this point, we've seen like automate the detection. So we'll just kind of like wrap it all together. And this is where I think maybe people will be able to get the most benefit from it. So you have to provide either a URL or a feed of URLs to the tool. So the feeds that I like to use are URL scan. Now, if anyone's not familiar with URL scan, check it out. It is a massive resource for anyone who's looking at phishing. They index stuff from Fish Tank and OpenFish, as well as user-submitted stuff manually or through APIs. So you get a lot of good phishing stuff there. So that's the feed I've been using. It just allows for us to get pretty good ratio of actual fishes to non-phishing pages. Another thing you could do is if you are running like Bro or Zeek, you can pull out your SMTP URLs and just kind of feed those into it. And this is where I think the biggest benefit for a lot of folks could be, is in finding the stuff that's actually hitting your environment or the stuff that is being reported to you. So if you have a phishing inbox, right? Like, check this for any links and submit those through this tool. It'll spit out an image with the screenshot and a potential rule. And again, right, like, so it'll just go through, grab the page, grab a screenshot, generate a rule, and test that. Right now we're still testing manually through just PCAPs on the wire. But this is where I think the real benefit for people who don't have a large phishing program, what they could get from this. So one of the other things I wanted to add, right, like I've already mentioned, the talk I gave last year was using Orca to crawl phishing pages to try to download the source code. The source code is actually really cool because a lot of the times it'll include adversary email addresses, or like web panels with really cool passwords hard-coded into them. So one of the things you can do is, these tools, they use the same sources and log feeds. So they kind of just like go hand in hand. And just a quick, like, 1 minute of the talk last year, essentially what the tool does is you send it a URL, it breaks it down into the directory structure, tries every directory structure that it finds, looking for open directories. If it finds open directories, it'll look for any zip files in there and then download them. If it doesn't find an open directory, it'll still try the directory name as a zip file, because we've had a lot of success with attackers. If directory indexing is turned off, the file still could be there named after the directory that it expands out to. So this is just one way we can use this to grab attacker potentially tools or right content. When the attacker gets their own email address submitted to them in the form, it kind of can spook them a little bit. We had one that we were playing around with where the page went down within like 10 minutes of us submitting his username back to him, which was pretty fun. And again, there are a few considerations with this whole thing. So all of the rules are generated from attacker data, essentially, right? Like, it's the phishing page. We don't control what that is. So not that we have to worry about like malicious content coming back to us. As far as I know, there could be an issue with Beautiful Soup and Python. As far as I know, we don't have to worry about that. However, this stuff is still attacker controlled, so the input fields could very easily be named after something incredibly benign. They could use the same input fields that Gmail uses, and if the rule is too broad, you might now start alerting on people logging into Gmail, which is not what you want. And again, right, like, we still have to rely on an analyst's gut feelings. Like, at the end of the day, they're the people who are involved most in looking at the phishing that goes on in your environment. They're going to have the best sense of what is normal. So if they look at something and they're like, not concerned, maybe we don't write a rule, or maybe we don't use the rule for that one. I'm also, there's like I mentioned, there's still some things that I want to work on with this. Mainly more testing. Right now it's sitting in a VPS that I run, just kind of periodically running and creating new rules. But the thing I'm trying to really get with it is more rules or more phishing pages from a larger source. So URL scan's great, but that's only what people submit to it. So if I can get additional stuff, then we can create more rules and just more test scenarios. The more phishing sites we get, the more rules we can create. All of this stuff helps to just create like a better version of the tool. And that's really where I'm at now. Like I mentioned, there's some stuff I want to do with the pruning the URI down, so that we're only alerting on components of the URI. And if anyone is at all interested in any of this, or if you have like a a nice Suricata deployment and you want to start running some test rules, reach out. I would be very happy to send over the test rules I have. And that is all I have. So if anyone has any questions, I would be happy to answer them. If not, you can reach out to me on Twitter, or I'll be around. Thanks.